So the biggest reflection in action that took place for me the day of doing my lesson was actually before the lesson even started, when Real Player wasn't installed on the computer. I had thought about this being a possibility, but assumed that that computer would have it, which obviously after multiple failed technological attempts in that room, I probably should have assumed they wouldn't have it. But um, I was able and prepared to adapt, and I felt fine about going about it in a slightly different direction than I had originally planned. And this little minor change left me with a couple minutes short on time, but I still felt okay about the change that I made to my lesson. So we've just finished once, and even though we just finished it, we're going to go back all the way to the beginning and look at the dedication in the book. So if you guys could open your books to the dedication page. Does someone want to read this out loud for me? Sarah.
For all the children whose stories have never been told.
Tell the stories, then you're not going to remember the people. And I think that if you don't remember the people, then you're going to have a serious problem in the future.
Yeah, I think that's true too.
I think that if the stories aren't told,
This is where I was struggling a little bit because I was trying to incorporate the video that didn't work, but kind of talk about it and include it in my lesson in a different way that would still be approachable and reasonable within the lesson, but it was definitely difficult. So that just goes to show me that I really do need to have a very, very specific backup plan the next time. There's some of them that they're very detailed, they're emotional, and they tell exactly what happened and how they were feeling, and they're these emotional interviews where they're crying and all that, but then there are some where the emotion is just completely drained, and they'll tell the facts about what happened, but they don't actually want to go into what happened to them. They'll really only tell the big picture story because it's difficult for them to tell it. But at the same time, it is still important for them to get the story out there so that it's memorialized. And so it's not. So I used the word memorialized about 10 times after that, just totally forgetting that, I said that this was the 7th or 8th grade level and they probably wouldn't understand that word, but I never really explained it, and I actually didn't really notice that I did that until I went in to observe Jason in his classroom. I think it was the next day, and he said some big word that the students totally didn't understand, and then he realized that he needed to explain it, and there's some words that we don't realize that at that level that they're just not going to understand, so I need to watch out for that next time.
So just any memory that we want.
Something that you think is important enough to be memorialized. Important enough to you. It doesn't have to be, something that we're going to think is wildly important, but,
is it memorable in a good way or memorable in a bad way?
either. But keep in mind you might be sharing these with either the class or partner, so. I was really glad that during this whole section I was actually able to go over and help a few of the students that were having trouble with the prompt, and I was really looking around and trying to see who I could tell was having trouble, and I could tell that Aaron and Sarah were having more trouble than most people, but it's definitely an improvement, at least for me, to see that I have the confidence to actually go up to these students and see what they're having trouble with and actually be able to help them and give them suggestions as to how they could go about this process in a better way.
Yeah, putting it in that context. Okay.
Is there anyone that would want to share their story?
Okay.
Royal?
I read, once I saw blood in the water all around me. Turns out getting a front flip into a pool is not such a great idea. 3 days, 42 stitches, and 6 skull staples later, I was able to go. I still have the scar to remind me concrete is not soft.
I was really glad also in this part that I was more aware than I was when I presented my hook of actually responding to students. Like I said, it seems like such a simple task to just actually respond when they say something, but it's so much harder to actually process and synthesize what they say and make it meaningful within the conversation. So I was really trying to do that, and I think that I did a little bit better than I did in my hook, but I still definitely have strides to take in that area.
I feel like that's kind of like Felix's notebook, that it's like this, almost like a comfort to see it at times because they're important.
This was the part of my lesson where I started to kind of get lost in the point that I was actually trying to make with my students, and it took a completely different turn, which I think is good to realize that that can definitely happen during our lessons. And my lesson took more of a turn into storytelling and why it's important for everyone to have a story. And I think that that's okay. It wasn't what I was planning, but I think that it turned out okay overall.
Once I ran away from home because I was scared about what my parents would say or do about what I had done. And I had a hard time coming up with it because I wasn't sure about what memory to pick, but it really helped actually when you said that, think about something that I would want my own kid to want to know. And so this memory for me would tell them that no matter what you did, you can always go home.
Here, Sarah reminded me that not all of my students are going to have good stories to say during a lesson like this. Not that Royals was by any means a good story or anything, but he had a good positive spin on it, having a good outlook on life, and Sarah's was a little bit different. And as she was saying it, I can remember just being totally nervous, trying to figure out what I was actually going to respond. So it's something I need to work on, how to handle those kind of situations too.
And tomorrow we're actually going to look, we're going to go to the complete opposite end and look at the end of the novel and look at the letter that the author wrote to his readers at the end of the book. So we're going to switch gears and go to the end instead of the beginning. So we'll start with that tomorrow morning.
During my lesson, I definitely felt better than I did while delivering my hook the last time. I felt a little bit shaky just because, like I was talking to Dr. Cater about right before class, I simply could not wrap my head around this text in a way that I could teach it. I loved the book, but I almost had so many different directions that I thought I could go in that I couldn't get my mind to completely focus in on one. So I felt a bit scattered. But the one thing that I really liked that I did this time, like I said, was to actually respond to students, to remember to do that. It seems silly to forget, but it's definitely difficult. It's so easy to get caught up in everything else going on inside your head, what's next, and totally ignore what a student is saying and just move on to the next one, which totally isn't okay. I'm glad that students were able to get into the activity that I planned. I was a little worried that it would just be too boring or I don't know. But it seemed like they all had some good questions and some good responses, which of course I'm not sure how realistic it is since it was just our cohort doing it, but hopefully the same sort of thing would happen in a 7th or 8th grade classroom. I was also really happy about the fact that I was able to help some students with their prompts and get them to be able to wrap their heads around the book and the prompt and help them see it a lot more clearly, which was really cool for me. I still have a ton of goals to work towards in my teaching. I'm comfortable in front of the class, but I don't necessarily trust myself yet. I want to get to the point where I can completely trust in what I have to say and what I have to show my students. I don't think that I always completely do believe that I have something important and worthwhile to always say to them in response to what they have to say. There's so many different lessons and activities that I want to try out with my students, and if I can get to the point where I trust myself to try them, then I think that that'll really be great, especially within this class. And I think it's so difficult to do so right now, especially because all I want to do is try things out in my field placement, but mine doesn't exactly allow for much room to help out in the classroom and really try a lot out. So I think I'll be trying a lot more in this particular class in the future and taking some risks. But I'm working on it though, so that's good.